Hi, welcome to my abode, and thanks for clicking. I hope you enjoyed the video. So the first of discussions, the battlefield between Tori Amos and Kate Bush. The former, or Tori Amos, being called a ripoff of Kate Bush from some of the Kate Bush fans, and I love both of these artists, but both of these women are completely different from each other. So Tori Amos didn't even know about Kate Bush until later down the road. Tori says on May 1998 of Q magazine, I was playing in a club, I was 18 or 19, and somebody came up to me, pointed their finger and said, Kate Bush? I went, who's that? I wasn't really familiar because Kate didn't really happen in the States until House of Love. I was shocked because the last thing you want to hear is that you sound like someone else. And this continued from other people, colleagues, so she eventually does listen to Kate Bush Hounds of Love album. And there's a side A and a side B. Side A, she said, was okay, but side B really drove the hammer to the nail. And the album changed Tori world. It influenced her to leave her toxic boyfriend at the time. She packed her things but left her Kate Bush House of Love album behind because she didn't want it to influence her throughout her career. Again, on May 1998 of Q magazine, Tori Amos says, but I knew I had to be careful, so I didn't voraciously learn her catalog. I left the records with my boyfriend at the time because I didn't want to copy her. Obviously, Kate Bush influenced Tori Amos, but not as huge as people believe. That's like Joni for Kate Bush. There were other artists that impacted Bush more. There was a rumor I found online. Kate Bush hates confessional music, which is false because it was a post saying Kate Bush hates Tori's songs because she's not a fan of confessional music, even though not all of Tori's songs are confessional. Rather, most are personal and autobiographical. So here's a clip of an interview from 1978 when Kate Bush was only 19 years old, where she discusses her writing process.
Heights, and it came from that image of Kathy at the window. Is it an idea like that, or is it perhaps sometimes a phrase of music or a few words that come into your head? How does it happen?
It's very often from other people. I mean, people are just so full of poetry. They say it all the time, you know, and there are the most amazing phrases that people come up with that just aren't covered. And you can really draw from people's minds and the situations people are in. They're always in different situations with different mental things going on inside them. For me, they're probably the most fascinating source of stimulation.
It's ridiculous to say Kate Bush hates confessional music when Kate Bush loves listening to people's stories. So on the same interview, Kate Bush gets asked if Joni Mitchell was an influence on her work.
When I was trying to think of possible influences on you, the name that kept coming to my mind was Joni Mitchell. I wondered if you were a fan of Joni Mitchell.
I admire her very much. I haven't, in fact, listened to her that much, and I think the main reason is I try not to listen to female artists too much, just because for me it would be too easy to relate with them. I mean, I love Joni Mitchell, and whenever I hear her, it sends shivers at me, you know, but I really try to listen to expansive music.
No disrespect to Joni Mitchell, she's phenomenal. Joni wasn't relating herself with women either. Women were only being compared to other women. Women were not seen as equal as men. Bush wanted to understand men so she can break stereotypes. Yet Bush is an individual. She didn't copy her favorite artists. Rather, she took aspects she liked about them and made it her own. And aside from music, movies helped with her creative outlets since listening to music can sometimes be stressful, especially when working on an album. But music is still a powerful force. For example, her song Sat in Your Lap being influenced by Stevie Wonder's concert she attended in 1980. Think of it like this. Whenever you're working on a project, you don't want to be wrapped up in one particular artist's work. You want to make it your own and jump from other artists' works to inspire you. That way you're not a reenact of an existing artist. And I think that's what most artists are afraid of, being compared to another artist, which may sound good on paper. Wow, she's the Kate Bush of our generation, or who is the next Tori Amos? But all artists want to become their own individuals, not replicas of an original. Stay original and continue to evolve as an artist. I think that's a good motto to live by. Moving on, I love to share with you guys Kate Bush and Tori Amos artist influences that shape their sound. I'll be showing you guys a diagram of Kate Bush influences from Thomas Gonzalez's website, music blog, and adding my thoughts on it. I'll attach it somewhere. Right off the bat, I have to disagree with having Joni Mitchell as a key figure in her music career. I think Kate Bush only had male artists as her influences because she wanted to have a man perspective of writing and recording music. In other words, a universal perspective. And I can definitely relate to that. I'm a guy who usually prefers listening to female artists. Frankly, women today perform better than men and are better troubadours. As a guy, I just don't believe in the stereotypes on gender. A woman must have long hair. A man must stay strong at all times. I think we can just try on things that we like, not because society determines what we can and cannot be. My enjoyment for women artists comes from how I relate to their words or pulling by their inner self, and I'm not ashamed of that. But what I love most is when they are confident and resilient, breaking preconceptions of gender norms. That's why I love Kate Bush and Tori Amos. Both of them are unapologetically brave, creative, and innovative with their music. Their music are universal, heavy, and intrusive. There's a great podcast on Spotify I highly recommend on a man to embrace the notion of femininity called Being a Man and Being Love with TJ Robinson, hosted by Nathan Barna, Optimal AF. I loved it a lot, so I think it's worth checking out. Anyways, let's first talk about Roy Harper, an English singer, songwriter, and guitarist known for subverting the folk genre, writing poetic lyrics, and flouting the standards of radio-friendly music. Harper is mistakenly seen as a folk musician. On the contrary, he considers himself as a poet, not really resonating with the folk scene, but modernizing it. Harper was influenced by romantic poets, such as John Keats and Percy Shelley. The Beat Generation. And Lonnie Donegan. Kate Bush has also cited Harper as an English poet in a BBC radio interview to Paul Gambasini.
I think he is a very English poet. I mean, I think Roy is a poet, I really do. And for me, Roy is one of the greatest English songwriters we've had, and people just don't realise it. And I really think that when they do, we're going to have another top songwriter up there. He's brilliant.
Roy Harper was playing music in folk clubs, notably at the Spawning Ground, Les Cousins, in the Soho district of London, England during the mid to late 60s, where the likes of Bert Chance, Davy Graham, John Renbourn, John Martin, Sandy Danny, Nick Drake, and Paul Simon played and competed against. Well, Davy Graham was above competition, eccentric, according to Harper. Nick Drake has even asked Harper for pointers in playing the guitar. I didn't even know about Roy Harper until I listened to Kate Bush covering one of his songs, Another Day, alongside Peter Gabriel. It is a beautiful, sad song, personal. I haven't listened to much of his music, but I did love Me and My Woman from his album Stormcock. In order to make this video and understand Kate Bush's love for his music,
and I also think he deserves the recognition.
I listened to 3 of his albums, Flat Baroque and Berserk, all 4 epics of Stormcock and HQ. Flat Baroque and Berserk blew me away with his punk attitude in I Hate the White Man, melancholic humor or tragic comedy in Feeling All the Saturday, and defiance in How Does It Feel, which I think is the best song in the album and was also featured in TV series The Handmaid's Tale.
This is a song for people who've got one set of words for me and one set of words for Mummy. This is a song for the whole human race.
Although my personal favorite song in the album is Song of the Ages. There's a house on the hillside in a picture book where he stands with his mother as I stop and look. He's a child of the Northlands with his long golden hair and his smile running wild in the snow by the campfire where the nights are long. Beautiful poetry. The narrator is Roy Harper with his long blonde hair who opens up a picture book of a happy family. And it's like, the boys like me, for real. Long golden hair. Harper was born in England, Manchester, and I believe that's considered the north of England. His mom passed away a few weeks after his birth and he ran away from home. So this tells me this poem or song is about escaping into a book and also on a memory lasting a lifetime. Roy Harper beautifully makes use of imagery between the doting wife and her singing husband with the lines, and she washes his eye with the fair stars above, referring to the wife using the falling snow from the night sky to clean her husband's eye. Just like Kate Bush's music video, Moments of Pleasure, where the stars in the night sky transform into snow. Her song also talks about memories, fun-filled memories with people in her life who have passed away. Things fade away, but like music and books, memories, the good and bad, can stay with us for a long time, hence the title Song of the Ages. At the end of this poem or song, the narrator closes the book and plans to read it again later. I think the title Song of the Ages is parallel to Songs of Songs or Solomon, greatest of all songs, which is regarded as erotic, or a better word, sensual, between a man and a woman. Essentially a love poem in the Bible. And for your information, the Beat Generation did write sensual material. Instead of sensuality, the songs paint an eternal love within a family and a picture book that Harper escapes to because reading it gives him so much joy.
Two silver green flies to flicker the backdropping lush of the emerald springtime, to lust for a moment in love of another as dust on a dragonfly's wing. And love is no torment, for we'll give when we can.
Stormcock is hands down his best album. It even heavily inspired Joanna Newsom's album East and influenced the way Newsom wrote and instrumented lengthy songs. The first song is titled Hors d'oeuvres, which in French means appetizers, but it can also mean outside of the work, a warm-up. And like an appetizer before a meal, Harper is letting the audience know this album is what he wants to do, not what the music business people want him to do. Only the listener can judge the album's value rather than the business people or the 12 wise men. It's an 8-minute dissing track on the music critics. The Same Old Rock is for anyone who is trapped by a system, but no specific subject. Is 12 minutes long. One Man Rock and Roll Band is a 7-minute anti-war song, criticizing war as nothing but awful, just like the way Bush presented war as awful in her music video Army Dreamers, where the mother is seeing her deceased son fighting combat instead as a rock star, politician, or father. Her son didn't get to live his own dream. Also, I love how Bush says, instead of didn't, because she's giving the effect of grieving and not being able to speak properly. Finally, the main chorus, me and my woman, wishes Harper every day fight for what he believes in. Harper isn't really talking about an actual woman, maybe in some parts of the song, but rather is a stormcock or missile thrush, perhaps based on British poet Ruth Pither's poem Stormcock and Elder, that shares a similar symbolic meaning as Harper. His woman is a motif for hope through music. It's why the album is called Stormcock, because Stormcock is a bird that can sing its song even in the wet, windy, or cold weather. It might be Harper's most personal song, mentioning how he was born without a mother, and saying how his life was already scarred or dead the moment he was born. The song shifts from winter to spring. Robins are considered a British UK winter icon, whereas the cuckoo is associated with spring. Also, the part when cuckoo is mentioned in the line, the cuckoo, she moves through the dawn fanfare, is neat because that's when the sound of horns start to play, and fanfare is when horns or other brass instruments play to introduce someone or something important. Details like that is what you can expect from Kate Bush music. It's music that heals. It touches you. From the beginning where the speaker lets the stormcock sing its song to the end of the song. The speaker, epiphany. Only time can tell where I'm a-going to. At the end of this 13-minute long poem, Harper cools down with a clear head and says he is best not knowing or staying anxious about what the future holds. It's his life to make. Other subjects the song covers on are anti-religion, bad parents or role models, and outcasts or black sheeps. Harper has cited this song is about the human condition, so questions that cannot be answered. We have to overcome our problems head on instead of giving in to society. It was an unprecedented album, showing no signs of a single or radio-friendly 3-minute song. It's really sad Harper did not get the deserved recognition like the way Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd did, who were inspired by the long tracks, and the latter had no single to be found anywhere. The record company didn't want to support Harper's album, and I believe if they had, he would have been commercially successful, but Stormcock touched the lives of many musicians. HQ is my least favorite album. The game sounded like a watered down You Really Got Me by the Kings to me. I think it's the fact that the music made it hard to make out the lyrics. HQ is a special album because it's an LP from Harper's band Trigger. It's the only album from the unit since the band disbanded. Roy Harper's band Trigger included members Chris Betting on guitar, Dave Cochran on bass, and Bill Bruford on drums. The game talks about being prisoners and needing to stay clean. Listening to it again, there's some things I like and hate about it. There's also a song called You in his album The Unknown Soldier, which features Kate Bush vocals. The Spirit Lives is an anti-religion song and is a straight-out poem. I actually prefer reading the lyrics than hearing it, although I dig the instrumentals after Harper finishes singing, which picks up to Grown-Ups Are Silly Children, really rock and roll or Chuck Berry vibes, whereas Forget Me Not is psychedelic and I really love the climax. Referendum and Hallucinating Light were great tracks. The energy in Chris Betting guitar in Referendum, what a banger. And Hallucinating Light takes me to another dimension, airy, as if I'm floating. I have mixed feelings with When an Old Cricketer Leaves the Crease. I love the instrumentals and melody, but then it started to feel repetitive, which essentially isn't a bad thing. It's really beautiful though. The sound of the brass is gorgeous. Lyrically poetic. When an old cricketer leaves the crease, you never know whether he's gone. If sometimes you're catching a fleeting glimpse of a 12th man at silly mid-dawn. Harper used a fun game of cricket as a metaphor for time. Time flies by when you're having fun. Harper really captures the fleeting of time with the instrumentals. It reminded me of the song Astral Observatory from The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, which is a video game about going back in time and again to prevent the moon from crashing down on Earth. And both of these songs really gives off the feeling of the inevitable or accepting your fate. So there we have it. Roy Harper is a poet, a storyteller who creates art. Roy Harper is unapologetically brave and a rebel. I believe Kate Bush was inspired by his rebellious nature aside from his poetry. Folk artists Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel influenced Kate Bush. The first album she owned was their Bridge Over Troubled Water album. She heard them on the radio, where she also discovered David Bowie and Elton John. Kate Bush was drawn by Bowie's deconstruction of gender norms and his performances, especially in the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. She will later take dancing lessons from Lindsay Kemp, who was the genius behind the choreography in Ziggy Stardust. David Bowie climbed up a ladder, then sang on the top stage, while the dancers acted like aliens or creatures. Bowie combined theater and rock music, which was revolutionary at the time in 1972. On April 20th, 1973, David Bowie introduced a new character, a lad insane, where sounds out, a lad insane. Oh, the British. Ziggy Goes to America. David Bowie would describe a lad insane. Insect-like, Kate Bush describes Ziggy Stardust, but sexy, she paired together. For my generation, watching Lady Gaga as a kid was my exposure to an alter ego that was bizarre, unworldly, and fascinating. Kate Bush was there at the last live performance of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars on July 3rd, 1973 at the Hammersmith Odeon, where David Bowie would tell his fans Ziggy Stardust will be retiring, making crowds of people sob, including Kate Bush. Rock was beginning to become heavier in the 70s, with bands like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath changing the sound in that decade. And the piano was being pushed back from the rock era, except Elton John was one of the few to give the audience a taste of getting a piano jammed in your ear with his catchy riffs, twists and turns of playing, and dynamic melody. Young Kate Bush had 2 posters on her bedroom wall, the recent one being David Bowie, and the oldest one being Elton John. Bush loves Elton John. Of course, Elton John would be incomplete without Bernie Taupin, his long-term songwriter, when combined would make Elton John a powerhouse. Elton John's specialty is as a composer. He came up with the riffs and the melodies for the lyrics. Bernie written, which meant revising them. So Elton John also was a part of the writing process. One of Kate Bush's favorite Elton John songs is Rocket Man, which she had the honor to perform her own cover of the song. Bush was influenced by Taupin's storytelling on dark or deep subjects in music. In Rocket Man, he tells a science fiction story based on the Rocket Man from Ray Bradbury's book, The Illustrated Man, about how lonely it is as an astronaut. And in Candle in the Wind, he tells a story about Marilyn Monroe, focusing on the tragedy that befalls celebrities. Both of these songs are a wake-up call to glamorizing these stars, people who are revered but are actually people like anybody else. Whereas Bush was influenced by John's musical performances, John was heavily inspired by the glam rock movement, like the God of Glam, Mark Bolan, David Bowie, and Bryan Ferry. Neither a sex symbol nor dancer on stage, Elton John grabbed his audience attention with funny-looking outfits and Bernie's poetic lyrics in combination of his piano playing and way of conveying those lyrics. I have to talk about Bryan Ferry from Roxy Music, okay? Roxy Music is another glam rock band Kate Bush was influenced by, especially their early music career. They can be best described as avant-garde. They were new wave before new wave was a thing, like the Blondies and the Smiths in the late 70s, and gothic before Susie and the Banshees and The Cure, also in the late 70s. They were experimental in their music, having Andy McKay on either the oboe or saxophone, and Brian Eno on the synthesizer to somehow complement the drums, bass, and guitar. On top of that, Bryan Ferry has a unique voice, quite strange, really. Whimsical in Virginia playing.
Throw me a line, I'm sinking fast, clutching at straws, can't make it. Having a sound, trying, hard as the hips to driving wood.
To the alluring voice in Ladytron.
Searching at the start of the season, and the only reason is that I'll get you.
Your sister, I was born. You must lose me like an arrow shot into the killer's storm.
On the second album, dark and sinister, like with the song "In Every Dream Home a Heartache."
Immortal and life-size, my breath is inside you. I'll dress you up daily and keep you till death size. Inflatable doll, lover ungrateful, I blew up your body.
To confirm this, Peter Swales asked Kate Bush, "You never sing a song straight. Are there singers whom you study in developing your own styles of phrasing?" Which Bush replied, "I would really be missing the point if I didn't mention Bryan Ferry, because I thought he was the most exciting singer that I'd heard. His voice had limitation, but he managed to do with it was beautiful. I mean, Beautiful. For me, it covered the whole emotional spectrum, and I just couldn't get enough of it. You know, the early Roxy albums with this beautiful voice and lyrics, and Eno, they're in the background, magic." Unfortunately, Eno left the band, and by their third album, they drew out their glam after it became mainstream.
I've got a favourite songwriter and band in England called Roxy Music. It was a character called Bryan Ferry, who I think is probably spearheading some of the best music that's come out of England in years.
Bush has mentioned thinking of herself as a man when it comes to writing songs and playing on the piano on Kate Bush Melody Maker interview, The Kick Outside, June 3, 1978 by Harry Doherty. In time, Bush would see herself as a person at work, rather than a man. There were female artists that played on the piano in the 70s, such as Carole King and Lindsay DePaul, but they didn't interest young Kate Bush, too female style. Not that they were rubbish. Kate Bush loved songwriting for music to speak out or club you in the head. Personal had nothing to do with it. It's the sweet language in their songwriting and style of playing the piano that did not fascinate Kate Bush. Bernie Taupin and Roy Harper have written personal music, but in a form of delivering a story or crafting art, and Kate Bush prefers Elton John's style of playing the piano. Carole King and Lindsay DePaul are good songwriters and composers, but too pop-written.
The direction I'm going in with my art is the way I want to go, because for me it's a little bit deeper, it's got more meaning, it's not so poppy, I suppose. But of course, maybe that won't be so widely accepted, especially in the singles chart, where it seems that things do have to be obvious, really, to stand a good chance of getting posted.
I love to give an honorable mention to Laura Nyro, an American female songwriter, singer, and pianist who really played her piano like rock and roll. As for Bush progressive rock influence, Genesis played a big part, especially original lead singer Peter Gabriel, who had her performing in song Don't Give Up, a song that saved Elton John's life. Peter Gabriel wasn't a glam rocker, but he was inspired by the idea of dressing up from the norm, similar to Elton John. In Genesis' early music career with Peter Gabriel, Gabriel combined rock and theater to the band, inspired by David Bowie after seeing his Ziggy Stardust performance at Borough Assembly Hall in Aylesbury, England. This was where David Bowie did his first show with his alter ego, Ziggy Stardust, on January 29, 1972, Gabriel would wear bizarre costumes, bat wings, a flower, the fox head, and
Red dress.
Magog, and many more. I don't think Kate Bush listened to Genesis until meeting Gabriel in May 1979 at a memorial concert for her lighting engineer, Bill Duffield. Peter Gabriel was the one responsible for introducing Bush to the latest invention that came out the same year, the Fairlight CMI, an essential tool for her following albums, starting with her third album, Never Forever. Same with Pink Floyd, although it was Pink Floyd band member David Gilmour that got her signed to her first record label at the age of 16. She hadn't listened to Pink Floyd until much later after meeting him. I was intrigued by the strange voice, Gilmour told BBC. They weren't her foundations, but they were influences in her career. They were the doors to that progressive music sound. In many of Kate Bush music videos and performances, she dresses up to play the part of a character. So a lot of that inspiration came from glam rock, and it is thanks to glam rock for giving birth to the punk movement in the UK of the late 70s. Bush has cited she admires the punk movement, although seen negatively by the public, violent. We're just a group of youths expressing themselves like in every single young generation.
I thought that the whole thing was really just like a game, you know, it was just like a big business game. The business people were saying, oh no, we don't want them. And they're going, you know, it's all people acting and becoming roles and playing their roles.
The punk was all about breaking stereotypes, and I believe that's why unusual women like Lene Lavish with her song Lucky Number reaching number 3 on the UK charts in 1979.
Nina Hagen
and Kate Bush's song Wuthering Heights, reaching number 1 in 1978, were possible. And of course, there was New Wave.
Who is this girl, Cyndi Lauper, and why is she so unusual?
Kate Bush has cited she loves ECM Records and her European label opening the door for distinct sounds in jazz and classical music, and choosing independence over commercial. Particularly artist Eberhard Weber. Eberhard Weber is a German fretless bass player that inspired Kate Bush in her music as well as contributing in her albums, first collaborating with Kate Bush in her song Houdini, as well as playing in songs Mother Stands for Comfort, Hello Earth, Never Be Mine, Walk Straight Down the Middle, Pie, and Prologue. In describing his style of music, Kate Bush says Weber works beautifully with glockenspiel vibes, vocal pieces. His music is spacey and jazz rocky or fusion, and also places him in the same breath of talents with American bass player Jaco Pastorius and Stanley Clarke. Fluid Russell features the instruments, electric guitar, and the balalaka played by Bill Frisell, the marimba and the vibraphone played by Gary Burton, the tarong and the bass played by our VIP Eberhard Weber, and voices from singers Norma Winstone and Bonnie Herman. What made Weber an innovator like those great bass players, Jaco Pastorius and Stanley Clarke, was his unique sound. Author and musician Sal Cataldi of NYS Music gets into great detail on Weber and his innovation on his article called Silence Jazz Bass Icon Eberhard Weber Pans an Autobiography, which he writes, the quietly intense, uber cool Weber instrument of revolution was a 5-string electrified upright bass of his own design. This was before manufacturers regularly produced that invention around the mid to late 80s. Now, it is said that American manufacturer Fender came up with the first 5-string bass in 1964, but after Mike Ebersole of Bass Guitar Rocks write in his article called 5-String Bass Guitar Basics, It seems funny to me that Fender pioneered 5-string basses since the same company was reluctant to introduce the extra string to versions of their basses until, well, after most other major bass guitar manufacturers had embraced the concept. The 5-string bass guitar didn't evolve to the instrument that we know today until the 1970s, when both Alembic and Luther Michael Tobias created 5-string basses as custom-ordered requests from high-profile customers. Trio Bulgarka is a Bulgarian chamber formation established in 1975. Kate Bush flew to Bulgaria to collaborate with the trio on her album The Sensual World, and later again for The Red Shoes. Bulgarian folk singing is described as nasally, but the style of singing does not rely on the nose. Belting is similar to it, but it's not a term used in Bulgarian singing. It's a different way of singing. It's enchanting and powerful. Trio Bulgarka song Go Ahead Mother and Kate Bush song that features the group Rocket Tail are my personal favorite songs of that rich Bulgarian folk music.
And then they just burst into song, and it was the most beautiful thing. I mean, it's very rarely that I'm moved by music enough to want to cry, and within minutes I was just sitting there with tears running down my cheeks.
Kate Bush usually prefers the man vocals for backup singing, so it was new territory for her to have female vocals other than her own. Outside of Kate Bush, artist influences, her family played a big role in shaping her music career. From her mother's Irish roots and her love for Irish music, to her father's love for the classics and piano playing. And in that chain of events, a young Kate Bush would be interested in playing the piano. Her brother Patty exposed Bush to diverse music and a myriad of instruments from other cultures. On the iconic song Running Up That Hill, you can see Patty playing the Bulgarka, a Russian stringed instrument with the body of a triangle.
What do you call it?
It's called Strumento de Porco. That's its real name. Or at least the name that Pretorius gave it. He was a writer on musical instruments in the 17th century.
Kate Bush's older brother John introduced her to poetry into her life. She was already writing poetry as a little girl. John Carter Bush's poem was also featured in Kate Bush's song, Jig of Life. Of course, Bush is a sentient human being. She was grabbing books, digesting film that tasted good.
I really feel that anything that I see, read, listen to, feel, eat, etc. Is an influence, because anything you like, you're going to have an automatic attraction and want for it, and so even subconsciously you use it somehow. It gets in there.
Now we're on Tori Amos' artist influences and her foundations. I will be excluding Bernie Taupin and Elton John from the list, but like Kate Bush, she was inspired by Taupin's songwriting and Elton John's melodies and performances. Her first concert was even Elton John when she was 11 or 12. Tori Amos' foundations are Jim Morrison from The Doors, Led Zeppelin, especially Robert Plath, Joni Mitchell, Leonard Cohen, Jimi Hendrix, and Carly Simon. It's also crucial I list her poets, which will be discussed on this video, but first it's worth talking about the Beat Generation.
I'd like to apologize for doing the Beat Generation a disservice. I talked about the Beatniks with a clip of Funny Face starring Audrey Hepburn, but however, the Beatniks I think are there for the aesthetic, not all of them, and some would eventually grow up to be hippies. Hippies were seen negatively. I'll make it right by being more in-depth with what exactly is the Beat Generation, an important literary and cultural movement that influenced artists, apart from Roy Harper, just as Bob Dylan, the Beatles. A beat reference, get it? Beat as in beat music. Kurt Cobain, Jim Morrison of The Doors, Leonard Cohen, and subconsciously Joni Mitchell. I'm gonna try to kill two birds with one stone. So explaining the Beat Generation using my memory, I was not yet sentient. These group of writers rebelled against conforming to academic writing and poetry. They wanted to have the freedom to write how they wanted to. There was a trial in 1957 for beat writer Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl for obscenity and vulgar language. In short, he won the case because Howl has social value. It wasn't just nonsense, but a statement to society. Even today, there's 50 Shades of Grey, and books that swear are normalized. Naked Lunch by beat writer William S. Barrow, published in 1959, was also trialed and won his case for the same reason. Equally important beat figures were Jack Kerouac, author of On the Road, and Neil Cassady, who the guys took inspiration in his wild lifestyle of drugs and affairs. For example, On the Road, the hero, or Dean Moriarty, is based on Neil Cassady. Actually was supposed to be the character's name. Irish modernist novelist and poet James Joyce was another big influence on Kerouac, especially in Joyce's work Ulysses, that has a different style of writing for every chapter. But the final chapter uses a stream of consciousness style of writing that Kerouac admittedly took and would become famous for. And Kerouac even got inspired by Joyce's literary alter ego, Stephen Dedalus. Okay, a pet peeve of mine is when self-insert characters are considered bad from the younger generation when they existed even way back with Dante's Inferno. But I digress. Kate Bush even took lines from Molly Bloom's Stream of Consciousness in the final chapter of Ulysses for her song Sensual World, and then would later be re-recorded as Flower of the Mountains, since Bush wanted to secure rights to use Bloom ending soliloquy, which Bush couldn't secure for the making of Sensual World at the time. What's weird though is that the Beats rejected Martin's approach to literature, just as authors T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. Those were grandiose writers to the Beats. Ginsberg even sent copies of his poem Howl to T.S. Eliot, William Faulkner, Ezra Pound, and all the big shots of Martin's. Ironically, Martin's writers like Virginia Woolf, William Faulkner, and James Joyce wrote in that stream of consciousness style of writing, and the Beats do like Franz Kafka. So what made the Beats so special or different? Just that these guys had no filter, and changed how people thought of free expression. The Beats were unashamed to speak out against war and discrimination, respected minorities, and embraced gay love. It was the Beat generation that influenced Bob Dylan's songwriting, and it's through Bob Dylan that other artists would be influenced by the Beat generation. But it is the poets that really influenced the songwriters more than Bob Dylan and the Beat generation itself. The beat varies to each individual, and I suppose beatnik is a subculture of that. As a whole, the beat is an attitude. Usually the beat people were into sexual freedom, Eastern philosophy, and spirituality, bebop jazz, literature, and poetry. I really think these beat guys and women were postmodern writers and poets with stream of consciousness being the main style. As Ginsberg famously said, first idea, great thought. There's a lot of nerds that argue if Bob Dylan, like a Rolling Stone, is stream of consciousness writing, but I think it is since Dylan was inspired by the Beats' work. And the first time I listened to it, that song just flows out like a flood, a gush of emotions. Dylan wrote it after not liking how he was labeled by people, almost quitting music entirely, so he wanted change and wrote like a Rolling Stone. It definitely intrigued the guys in Tori Amos' influences. Moreover, Leonard Cohen and Jimi Hendrix cited Dylan as a huge influence in their music. Led Zeppelin was huge, especially in America, as Amos requested on watching Robert Plant performance, and the song remains the same, and the band sounds and looks amazing in the early 70s. Robert Plant was a stud, his golden hair shining. His voice, and I hope I'm not offending, reminds me of Janis Joplin. I initially discovered them when I watched Shrek 3 as a kid, that scene where Snow White was screaming. Iconic. I didn't know it was from Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song, but that was my first time ever hearing Led Zeppelin.
Oh yeah, I forgot to say that Led Zeppelin dedicated a song for Roy Harper. Hats off to Roy Harper. In the third album, which Jimmy Page said he admired his honest approach. Those multi-neck guitars, hilarious. Yeah, I can see why Amos was enthralled by their music and performances. Amos also viewed their music on women as passionate, like they really love women, even with her other man influences, Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison. I'd say Elton John as well. Leo Cohen too. Cohen was quite a ladies' man, but a hopeless romantic, living in a paradox.
Wait a minute, this sounds like rock and or roll.
I want to stop for a moment before we move on to Jim Morrison. It's important to understand that Tori was fortunate to play the piano at the age of 2 and then be enrolled at Peabody Conservatory at the age of 5. Well, as if the gods were jealous of her fortune, she lost her scholarship and had to figure out her future without them.
Well, I was kicked out of the Peabody Conservatory at 11, and I think in the beginning the idea was that I would have the ability and the desire to become a concert pianist. And although I loved Prokofiev and the Russians and certain classical composers, it wasn't my language. And so my dad felt like, all right, if this is what you're going to choose instead of becoming a concert pianist and then making music for the Lord and the church, then you need to learn how to do it professionally. He took me down to Georgetown in Washington, D.C. He had his dog collar on. He dressed up, he took his Bible, and we went to try and find me a job playing music in piano bars.
The gay community was the first to open up the doors for Tori Amos and didn't judge her father for his minister attire. Mr. Henry's in downtown Georgetown, Washington, D.C. was the beginning of her music career. Henry Yaffa is the founder, previous bar owner of Mr. Henry. He owned another bar in Pennsylvania Avenue near Washington Circle. At the age of 21, Tori Amos would move to LA. As we learned, the Beats is prominent in LA, New York, and San Francisco. And of course, The Doors is a band that was formed in LA. Jim Morrison himself was born in California.
People were more open, experimenting with sounds and music, and I also was exposed to Native American ways of thinking from the Southwest, Hindu, Buddhism, all kinds of the Eastern mysticisms.
Different forms of spirituality.
Yes.
Jim Morrison, another handsome man. I think all her male influences are, just so I don't have to keep repeating about their looks. Jim Morrison has an alter ego as the Lizard King. Morrison was fascinated by Native American culture. The spirit animal he connected with was a lizard. In the song Dawn's Highway from The Doors' final studio album, An American Prayer, a tribute to the passing of Jim Morrison with his poems, Morrison shares his experience of witnessing death and becoming a host for the souls of 2 frightened Native Americans. Tori Amos has Native blood from her mother's side. Amos has also mentioned Chief Joseph as her hero and a great poet and speaker. Back to Morrison. One of my favorite songs from the album is A Feast of Friends. Death makes angel of us all, and give a swing where we had shoulders smooth as raven claws. My interpretation of these lines is that it is through death that we can transcend to angels. Then the speaker compares the smoothness of human shoulders to raven claws. That's totally Edgar Allan Poe.
She used to read you poems.
Yes, she would read me Bible stories as well, because my mother is a combination of both. And so she would balance out, I think, the Bible stories with Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay.
Sprinkle a little spice into my life.
Right.
So around 5 or 6, I remember her reading The Raven to me.
She read The Raven to you?
Oh, yes, she did.
It wouldn't be until The Raven, published in 1845, that Poe would become famous throughout America and England. Poe was inspired by Charles Dickens' novel Barnaby Rudge, which is the protagonist's name and who has a pet raven named Grip. Anyway, in reading The Raven, the narrator can't cope with the loss of his Lenore. He hears a tap from the door, a whisper outside his door, but opens to nothing. Scary. Then I think he checks from the window to come in a raven. The raven repeats, "Nevermore, nevermore," throughout the poem, and the narrator sees this bird as the prophet of evil, shouting for it to leave. But the raven refuses to leave him alone and haunt him to not forget Lenore. Of course, the raven is just his demon preventing him from sleeping. So back to Morrison's poem. By transcending, sure, wings are cool, but we lose our humanity, our mortality. I think the poem as a whole is about even through death, there are rules and regulations. It's no fun living after death. It's biblical and reference other things. So I don't really understand much of it without reading through the context. I wouldn't be surprised if Red Bull got its slogan from Morrison. Red Bull gives you wings. Prefer a feast of friends to the giant family. Giant family referenced the Titans from mythology. There was a 10-year war between the 12 Olympics, led by Zeus, and 12 Titans, led by Kronos. The Olympics were regular-sized people, whereas Titans were giants. Dionysus became an Olympic due to popularity from the Greeks, since he symbolized feasting and partying, and the Greeks were all for it, than simply having dinners with your family. Dionysus was half mortal and half god, so he actually cared for and was more involved with his mortal worshippers. It is said that he was the first to discover grapes turning into wine, which grapevines can be associated as or make him the god of madness, death and rebirth, and ecstasy. Being drunk is letting go of judgment and being free. People would wear masks in parties so they can be who they want. That also goes with theater, where they are performing as someone else. Nietzsche, one of Jim Morrison's influences and admirer, talks about Dionysus. There's also William Blake's work, Jerusalem, the Emanation of Giant Albion, that also features giants, and the story about Albina and her other 32 sisters, who were exiled because they plotted to slit the throats of 32 men who were assigned by their father to be their husbands. One of the sisters, who did love her husband, confessed to the murderous plot devised by Albina.
You need to leave!
They found land which Albina named Albion, and with no male inhabitants on the island, their desires gave birth to giants by the spirits of the island. Ironically, the reason these noblewomen rebelled in the first place was on the idea of submitting under a man, or the fact that their father was number one among kings. So they found themselves unparalleled to give men their bodies. I think this really ties in the poem Morrison wrote. Blake also written The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, which I think Morrison took inspiration from. And I'm not just talking off my bum. Morrison was heavily influenced by first-generation romantic poet William Blake. The wanton boy that kills the fly shall feel the spider's timidity, from Blake's work Auguries of Innocence. To Morrison line, "Do you know how pale and wanton, drillful, comes death on a strange hour? And drive your cart and your plow over the bones of the dead, or the cutworm forgives the plow," from Blake's work Proverbs of Hell. To Morrison lines, "These mutants blood meal for the plant that plowed." I'll leave it at that. Feel free to discuss your own thoughts. I felt the need to credit him as a genuine great poet, because I've read people calling him pretentious. simply for not understanding what he's saying. I think if you really admire somebody when you're studying their works and finding inspiration through them, then I don't think they are writing baloney. It's hurtful to dismiss someone for writing poetry that may not be easily digestible. And I think that's what's fun about poetry, where there's a mystery behind what the poem is about. Morrison was also into Eastern philosophy, as evident in his song The Movie, which he mentions Pogadas. Jim Morrison was the best performer. He was mystical, poetic, and had a unique voice that made him stood out from the rest. Thank you, Tori Amos.
So you had your mother reading you Edgar Allan Poe and your brother playing you Jim Morrison.
And my dad reading the Bible.
And your dad reading the Bible. That answers a lot of questions. Did your poetical influences change as well?
Totally changed. I discovered Rimbaud.
Amos also discovered French symbolist poet Arthur Rimbaud, who, like Tori Amos, was raised in a strict Catholic household. Symbolism is a style in France that began after the publication of Charles Baudelaire's famous work Flowers of Evil in 1857. Baudelaire was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's works. Symbolists, a movement said to begin in 1886, laid great stress on symbols in their work to express emotion, understand the world, and find truth. They touched on subjects that were personal. There's confessional with subject like sexuality, introspective and scary, fear of the unknown.
A Season in Hell is Rimbaud's most prominent work that influenced the Surrealism movement immensely. Rimbaud's works even influenced the Beats, especially his earlier poem The Drunken Boat, or Le Bateau Ivre in French, which Rimbaud personifies himself as a boat and is on his own independent journey to the unknown, without passengers or society to control him. Rimbaud
rebelled against the dogma of the church, broke the rules of poetry in France with free verse, or in French, vers libre, and experimented for new poetic language. Rimbaud wrote parodies on religion.
In his poem Evening Prayer, Rimbaud compared himself as an angel in the sky, peeing after drinking his beer and smoking on a Gambier pipe.
Truth over beauty. I do not like women. Love must be reinvented.
Whatever it is that binds families and married couples together, that's not love. That's stupidity or selfishness or fear. Love doesn't exist.
You're wrong.
Self-interest exists. Attachment based on personal gain exists. Complacency exists. But not love. Love has to be reinvented.
A confession of a love affair and his
gay relationship with symbolist poet Paul Verlaine,
and freedom.
Also, Rimbaud loved fairy tales, which can be seen in his work. Bob Dylan, Jim Morrison, and Patti Smith have cited inspiration from
Rimbaud
poetry. In Wallace Fowley's words, author of
Rimbaud
and Jim Morrison, the rebel as poet, Jim
Rimbaud
are clairvoyant and rebellious, accused poets, immensely popular. One lived 27 years, the other 37 years, nearly a century apart. Their parallel lives, short and intense, became legendary because they were inseparable from their works, which made them timeless heroes and myths. One is a creator of modernity, the other of postmodernity. Both carry their aesthetics and poetic visions to the end of their incandescences and their liberating vehemences. Because their dreams, their rhythm, and their poems continue to move and move our new century, we need
Rimbaud
and Jim Morrison more than ever today. In order to be a poet, one must be voyant, like
Rimbaud
defines in a letter, lettre du voyant. Voyant means a sensitive person who can see things beyond human perception, whereas clairvoyant would have a clearer picture of that, which means a symbolist is defined as spiritual. The Romantics, who were inspired by symbolists, were more about appreciating the beauty of nature, and the Dark Romantics were pessimistic on nature. You can see
Rimbaud
In Tori Amos music, for example, Crucified, got a kick for a dog begging for love. I got to have my suffering so that I can have a cross. I know a cat named Easter. He says, will you ever learn? You're just an empty cage girl if you killed the bird. You can see the mockery in religion from the second line. Most of the time, people have to suffer to be associated with religion. No offense to the practice of religion. I don't think there's any malice behind the song towards religion. The symbolism is genius. Tori Amos. From earlier, Tori Amos mentioned dog collar that her dad wears around his neck. And you can take that as the dog symbolizing the priest. And well, it's always fun how dog is associated with God. If you write dog backward, it becomes God. Got a kick for God, begging for love. This line contains humor. It's funny how people have to love God first before anything else. Then cat named Easter symbolizes Jesus, as Easter is the resurrection of Jesus Christ in Christianity. Lastly, bird refers to the girl Jesus fought in what he believed in until his crucifixion, as Jesus tells the girl, as long as you fight, as long as you still live, you can be free from the cage. Jesus is rooting for the speaker to stand up for what she believes in.
Also, Tori Amos personifies herself as a bird in this photo for Crucified. She is wearing a scallion necklace and a birdnest collar. Birds hate onions, toxins to their bodies.
Tori Amos has cited Baudelaire and Rimbaud as her poets' influences on Rolling Stone. 2009, Robert Merrill, Tori Amos track by track guide to little earthquakes. Coming out of beating myself up about the choices I had made, I just rolled up my sleeves and grasped at all of the poetry that had ever meant anything to me, from Rimbaud to Baudelaire, E.E. Cummings, Emily Dickinson, and also the visual artists. I surrounded myself with the stories and the thinkers that formed me, not that those that had the power to push the button wanted me to be formed with. Symbolists would then influence the modernists. Modernism started around the early 1900s and went out of style around the early 1940s. E.E. Cummings is a modernist poet. Amos also discovered confessional poets Sylvia Plath and Anna Sexton.
I discovered Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, and that was really, talk about a universe opening to me.
Tori Amos never thought of herself as confessional. I do think Tori Amos has written confessional songs like Me and a Gun, but as a whole, Tori Amos is not a confessional artist.
Was your song Me and a Gun that talks about a horrific sexual assault that you endured, I think was around that time. Did the writings that you've been reading give you the confidence to broach that subject, or was it something that you just had to do anyway?
I started reading Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, and I think that kind of emotion, the ripping off of skin so that you get to feelings that hide underneath muscle and bone, that's what began to loosen and awaken feelings that I had repressed and forced into a cell and muzzled, and I needed to see how other poets talked about their pain before I could do it myself.
Confessional is also misrepresented. Not only does Amos distaste the word, Joni Mitchell finds it bitter too. They deem that word as asking for forgiveness for committing or admitting to an atrocity or a sin. A better word would be personal or honest. What do these ladies have to apologize to?
Confession in this culture is usually, it's either in church and it's a sin, or it's is being whipped out of you in the police station. Right. I just find, or it's the confessions of the first person to write in first person in any language, I believe, was St. Augustine, who wrote volumes of I to his God, right? That was the first person to write that personally, I think, in literature anywhere, and it was called the Confessions of St. Augustine, so that comes in, But they lump me in with Plath and Sexton, who frankly, you know, to me, Plath is morbid and Sexton is a liar. She's not really telling the truth most of the time. She lied to her psychiatrist. You know, I don't like being on that list with those women. You know, I don't think they're as honest as I am.
I think it's important to know what exactly is a confessional writer. Confessional poetry emerged in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Known poets of the genre are Robert Lowell, Sylvia Plath, Anna Sexton, and W.D. Sandgrass. Honorable mention, Allen Ginsberg. He written Sexuality. John Berryman is also another key figure in confessional poetry, best known for the Dream songs. These poets spoke about their abuse, neurodiversity, mental disorder, alcoholism, suicide, drug use, infidelity, and sexualities. Poetry transitioned into music. Think Bob Dylan, who popularized a new medium for poetry. Bob Dylan was another huge influence for Joni Mitchell, as she didn't know one's own art can be turned into music. No one really did. Singer/songwriter was a new concept. It's why Connie Converse, an American singer-songwriter, is an icon, as she was already writing and recording poetry into music in the mid-1950s, way before Bob Dylan. It's worth mentioning Billie Holiday, who gave Strange Fruit, a poem from 1937 by Jewish-American teacher, poet, and social activist Abel Mirapal. Its death in 1939. Although Mirapal composed the song, obviously Billie Holiday stepped in to make it sound better. It's that exact song that made Holiday famous. People wonder what's so special about her. I'll tell you, viewer, that she had the ability to convey emotion into music like an actress materializing a script. For example, phrasing the word drop as to actually make it sound like the word is dropping from out of a tree, or metaphorically a corpse dropping. Tori Amos, Kate Bush, and Joni Mitchell have cited their love for this particular song, as well as admiration for her in general. If you hadn't noticed, Tori Amos was influenced by mostly American artists, whereas Kate Bush not so much. But it was through Lindsay Kemp Kate Bush was exposed to Billie Holiday. Poetry entered into rock and roll with the likes of singer-songwriter Jim Morrison from The Door and guitarist, singer, and songwriter Jimi Hendrix. Honorable mention, Lou Reed from the Velvet Underground, John Lennon from the Beatles, and of course Bob Dylan, Going Rock and Roll and Highway 61 Revisited. Joni Mitchell was a painter first before she transitioned to music. From what someone might think, she must have been influenced by poetry, right? Wrong. Joni Mitchell did not like poetry. She found those poets egoistic and the beats annoying. Ethan Brown, an American journalist, interviews Joni Mitchell influences and influences Joni Mitchell on April 29, 2005 from New York Magazine. He asked, "What about your songwriting, which is really so densely literate? Who influenced you there? Great poets or something else?" Which Mitchell replied, "I didn't like poetry. When I read the Shakespearean sonnets," terrible voice, okay. "I didn't like poetry. When I read the Shakespearean sonnets, I feel like some of them are mercenary. How many poems can you write where you say, 'You're so beautiful that you should reproduce yourself and I'm the guy to do it'?" She laughs. And keep in mind that Joni Mitchell briefly looked up to Leonard Cohen until finding out he stole from authors, Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca and French philosopher Albert Camus works into his songs, which is lazy in her eyes, but Cohen denied her accusation. Joni Mitchell is an innovator and proud of the fact that she was born in the same month and day as Marie Curie, a Polish physicist and chemist who discovered radium. Cohen did help Joni in expanding her literary canon with his favorite books and books recommendations. They can all be inspired. It's like somebody came up to him and said, "Give me a poem like you did for Joe and I'll give you $50. Mitchell continues, "I find a lot of poetry to be narcissistic. I agree with Nietzsche on the poets. He says something like, The poet is the veiniest of the vain, the peacocks of the peacocks. He muddles his water so they might appear deep. I know I'm throwing the baby out with the bathwater in a lot of ways. I guess there are a few poets I like though, like E.J. Pratt and Carl Sandburg. Joni Mitchell doesn't see herself as a poet, or at least not a meticulous poet like Leonard Cohen. I think Joni's approach to songwriting is that it should be fun or else why bother. Joni prefers to see her songs as art songs, but the most popular label is singer-songwriter. I think Joni's negative outlook on poetry is because her school didn't provide her with poetry that were more like Rimbaud.
There was a teacher, Mrs. Barrett, and she really thought that I was being lazy when it came to being open to certain poets. And so she really graded me down.
It's after first hearing Bob Dylan's that Joni Mitchell understood poetry. Blue is Joni's most honest album, I think, and that would help Tori Amos rediscover herself with composing her own music. Like Tori Amos, Joni can also play by ear. Joni became self-taught after her teacher didn't like Joni for playing by ear, and same with Tori Amos, who was kicked out of Peabody Conservatory at the age of 11. Ending with this quote from one of Joni Mitchell's favorite painter, Pablo Picasso, to fit her character. It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child. Leonard Cohen started his career originally as a poet and novelist during the early 1950s and 1960s, but his works, although garnered success, did not sell well enough for his finances. He transitioned to songwriting and made a pit stop to New York in 1966. Surprised, he was quite popular, even receiving the attention of Bob Dylan, Phil Ochs, and Lou Reed. In the same year, Cohen showed his songs to folk singer Jody Collins. Jody Collins sung Suzanne and it became a hit. People were interested in Cohen and it was Collins that persuaded him to come on stage to perform Suzanne with her. He did get stage fright midway through the song, but Colin encouraged him to come back to finish the rest of the song. Seeing how people loved him, I think Cohen felt a little bit sure of himself as a singer and a performer, since he hated his own voice and wasn't confident in his guitar playing. In 1967, at the age of 33, he started his career as a singer-songwriter. Amos loves Cohen's voice, describing it as sexy and ancient, and comparing it to Lucifer. Jimi Hendrix wouldn't have been a singer-songwriter without listening to Bob Dylan. To be fair, Jimi did say he was inspired by Dylan, but he was pushed by him to finish unfinished songs. Although I think Jimi was being modest because he doesn't want to compete against Bob Dylan in terms of songwriting. Dylan was on a different level Jimi didn't believe he could reach. If it wasn't the words or guitar playing that turned Jimi on, then perhaps it was how Bob Dylan knew how to craft a story while creating rhymes so easily that Jimi Hendrix wanted to do as a songwriter. But I do see Jimi as a poet. This is what Hendrix said about Bob Dylan in Dylan's song All Along the Watchtower, Jimi covered, reported on Society of Rock. I feel like that Watchtower is a song that I could have come up with, but I'm sure I would have never finished it. Thinking about Dylan, I often consider that I never be able to write the words he manages to come up with. But I'd like him to help me because I have loads of songs I can't finish. I just lay a few words on the paper and can't go forward, but now things are getting better. I'm more self-confident. Jimi Hendrix and his song The Wind Cries Mary are referenced in Mary, the rejected song from Amos' first draft that didn't make it to the Little Earthquake album. Jimi Hendrix's song is about the aftermath of a fight and how awful it made the narrator feel. Well, the narrator is Jimi Hendrix and Mary is the middle name of his ex-girlfriend. When Jimi Hendrix sings,
you can hear happiness staggering on down the street. Footprints dressed in red.
You can imagine happiness bleeding as he staggers or walks unsteadily
and leaving blood as you go. He's heartbroken. My favorite lines are, will the wind ever remember the names it has blown in the past? And with this crutch, its old age and its wisdom, it whispers, no, this will be my last, and the wind cries, Mary. Jimi Hendrix is the wind whimpering Mary's name out at a great distance because they're far apart now, and he will persistently call out her name. Even now, he is an old man with a wooden stick until one last time before he finally passes away. In Amos' song, Mary, it's about Mary as the title implies and not on the guy's perspective like in Hendrix. Tori sings, Mary, like Jimmy said, Mary, don't be afraid, cause even the wind cries her name. But seriously, Mary is a song of hope to someone who thinks all men are scumbags. The wind isn't Jimi Hendrix in the song, the wind is unnamed and just someone out there who loves Mary. My favorite lines. Rivers of milk are running dry, can you hear the dolphin crying? What we'll do when our babies scream, fill their mouth with some acid rain? When a baby is thirsty and the baby formula becomes sour, give the baby your milk. That is an image of tenderness, meaning Mary, don't be afraid to find love. Having your heart broken sucks and it makes it hard to trust anyone, but don't be afraid because even the wind cries your name. Amos has done justice to Jimi Hendrix's song, The Wind Cries Mary. Carly Simon's song, Boy in the Tree, spoke to Tori Amos deeply, even wishing she would have written it. The song is about restrained desire.
Tonight I lie alone again and I curse my own desire. Sentenced first to burn and then to freeze.
Sentenced to burn, then to freeze could possibly be a reference to modern poet Robert Frost. He wrote Fire and Ice, which is about desire and hatred leading to destruction. The speaker asks the question whether the world will end in fire or ice, to being burned to death or to freeze to death. In Boys in the Tree, the speaker is an adult recalling her youth as a girl who would watch boys outside her window playing in the trees, whereas she is stuck at home, not allowed to play with them since she is not a boy. Even at the age where children are innocent, she felt guilty with the thought of wanting to play with the boys outside. When the song is back to the present, her adult self, the speaker, still struggle with desire and her desire transforming to more groan or lust, describing it as her sheets, the color of fire, and again she has to keep her desire covered. But like in Fire and Ice, this restraint is self-destructive to the speaker. Carly Simon played a big part in her Little Earthquake album, especially in winter. From the lines of Boys in the Tree, here I grew guilty and no one was at fault, frightened in the power of every innocent thought.
Here I grew guilty and no one was at fault, frightened by the power in every innocent thought.
Really reminds me of lines from Crucify. Every finger in the room is pointing at me. I want to spit in their faces. Then I get afraid of what that could bring.
Every finger in the room is pointing at me. I want to spit in their faces. Then I get afraid of what that could bring. I got a bowling ball in my stomach. I got a desert in my mouth. Figures that my courage would choose to sell out now.
Both narrators are afraid and shamed for wanting to be free from rules of what is morally right for them. A lady must not hang with the boys, or a woman must not sin.
For a minister's daughter, this became my Bible. I needed to explore through poetry feelings that I had that were not being met. My feelings were being met by shame and by someone pointing a finger at you saying you need an exorcism or you have too many thoughts of the dark side, instead of it being a natural progression that as you become a woman.
Boys in the Tree. Last night I slept in sheets the color of fire. Crucify. I've been looking for a savior in these dirty streets, looking for a savior beneath these dirty sheets.
Different themes though, both narrators are like empty shells. They both desire this male essence to be wild and free. In Crucified case, the narrator has to find it in herself to access this male essence. When I use this term, the Dark Prince, this is my definition of male essence that is able to shed light in darkness. A lot of people around me at that time were turned on by cheap come-ons, drawn to thinking that the Dark Prince was somebody who would handcuff you and give you the orgasm of your life. Well, he doesn't need to handcuff you. It's boring. Go handcuff yourself. Piece by Piece by Tori Amos and Ann Powers. Again, Tori Amos writes her own material. Instead of boys growing in trees, the boys are flowers because the narrator is growing up and discovering them for the first time as desires. Although the narrator isn't sure she wants to grow up. And I know it's a common theme to associate girls as flowers and the sun as masculine, but the music video for Winter paints the opposite. The sun as feminine. The fires are burning. Sleeping Beauty trips me with a frown.
Sleeping Beauty that trips me with a frown.
The boys are the Sleeping Beauty. They are the flowers under the snow. She loses her balance because she is changing or being more aware of things. This frightens her. Beauty frightens her.
Did you react to the wonderful musings of Mr. Poe?
It's affected me my whole life as a writer. Having a little scary in your life as a piano player and as a woman who doesn't, screaming isn't what I'm known for.
Yeah.
That you find your power in your content, not necessarily how loud you are.
How could you see Rimbaud in your writing?
Well, I think through the years, it crops up quite a bit on every record.
I find it really interesting that in this song there's no mention of Snow White when there are lines, "Mirror, mirror, show me the crystal palace." And I'm inclined to believe the narrator is Snow White, the fairest of them all.
You know, many women search for their dark prince instead of becoming the dark prince themselves. And at a certain point, I realized that Lucifer was not just who we thought he was, but was a she, and had a lovely Chanel white suit on.
Carly Simon played a big part in tapping into her inner world. Of course, these are Tori Amos' own experiences and nobody else's.
The songs are creatures that have poetry that are woven within their beings. They are consciousness and they exist. I just have to have experiences in order to translate them.
This is something I dug up that Tori Amos was amazed with from 1973 film Jesus Christ Superstar. For context, Pontius Pilate is a high-level official that listened to his people and ordered for the crucifixion, the most painful death of Jesus. He sung a song called Pilate's Dream, and it's so moving. You're hearing it and you feel sorry for Pilate, who had no choice, and new people will blame him for his decision for all eternity. Well, that pretty much wraps up everything. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for sticking through my first video. I had a lot of fun creating it. I learned a lot, and I hope you guys did as well. Anyway,